Good morning, learners. We're so excited to have you back. Happy Tuesday. I am Miss Abby.
And I'm Mrs. Kraft, and we're so happy that you're here to join us for 3rd through 5th grade English Language Arts. So today, I wanted to review just very quickly what we looked at yesterday. And again, if you didn't tune in yesterday or you were not able to, please know that that episode is uploaded to our YouTube channel. So please go review that and take a look at it, because we gave you some information yesterday that you'll be able to use for our lesson today. So make sure that you do that if you're able. And if you watched with us yesterday, welcome back. All right, so I wanted to go ahead and review our essential question again that we talked about, and that is, how do authors use narrative elements to write a story? And remember, we looked at that word elements because that's a little bit of a tough word, and it's sort of hard to put a finger on. So the elements that we talked about yesterday were characters, right? Every story has to have a character, probably more than one, and it has to have a main character. So that is really important. The character can be a person, it can be a thing, right? Or it can be an animal.
Definitely.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a person.
Yeah, and we invited students to read narratives at home. They could be picture books, chapter books, comic books, and I see you brought a few books with you today.
I did. So I wanted to share some of my favorite books that you might be able to find and read, and think about those elements that we talked about. So the first one that I wanted to show you, and probably you all know this one, is The Diary of a Wimpy Kid. So this is a great one for 3rd or 4th grade, even 5th graders.
I love reading it. I love it too, yeah.
It's really silly and easy to read. So if you have that and you could get a hold of it, that's a great one.
A lot of narrative elements in there, setting,
Absolutely.
Characters, all of it.
Another one of our favorite authors, and I'm going to read a little bit from one of his books tomorrow.
Yes.
But this one is called Matilda. And this is a great book. This is my daughter's favorite book. And so I wanted to bring it and show you and just give you an idea. This one is really fun. And Roald Dahl he's got some interesting stories.
Great vocabulary in Roald Dahl books as well.
Absolutely. Another one that I love is called Stargirl.
Jerry Spinelli, the author, is one of my favorites. Whatever he writes, I love reading it.
And this is a one for probably 4th or 5th grade, I would say. But I also wanted to tell you that this one was filmed at Valley High School.
In Albuquerque?
Yes.
Wow,
so
that's awesome.
That's cool. You could look that up. I think it might be on Netflix. I'm not sure where the movie is, but it's out there. A couple of others. This one's called 100 Cupboards. It's a good sort of mystery. A little dark. And then this is a really fun one about 4 sisters called the Penderwicks.
Oh,
so
wonderful.
Those are just some really good ones that you can take a look at and read. We'd love to have you reading every single day.
Absolutely, and chapter books are exactly what our students should be starting to read and be curious about.
That's right,
Yeah.
that's right. Okay, Miss Abby, I'm gonna leave you to go over some word study, and I will join you all later.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, friends, so every Tuesday and Thursday, we're gonna be studying words together. It's called word study. Word study is just learning about words and finding patterns in words that we read. Sometimes students don't think about how words are constructed, but a lot of our words in English are made of patterns. If you're studying other languages, you'll notice there are patterns in those words as well. Patterns help us when we have to spell a word we are unfamiliar with. So it's good to study words that we know so that we can spell words that we don't know. And it's not just about spelling, it's about reading, and it's about learning new words as well. So every Tuesday and Thursday, we will have a word study lesson. You can use a piece of paper afterward because I'll give you some activities to extend when you're at home. So join me for today's word study lesson. Today we're going to talk about adding endings to base words. Now, when we add an ending to a word, it changes the word. Some common endings that we will add are ed, s, ing, and ly. Take a moment and think about a word that ends with ing. Maybe jumping, singing, playing, eating. Let's think about a word that ends with s. That usually means more than one. Cats, cars, elephants. Over here, let's think about words that end with ly. Ly usually tells us how to do something. Your teacher might have told you, please speak quietly. That's telling you how to speak. How about how to walk down the halls at the school? Slowly, calmly. It tells you how to do that verb. Today, we're going to talk about adding ed to the end of a word. When we add ed, it changes the verb. We can have the word jump, add ed, it becomes jumped. We can have the word shove, like if you shove your books in your bag, shoved. We add that and it changes the word. It changes it to past tense, meaning it's something I already did. I've added a few words here, and I want you to think about how they would sound if you added ed. Jump. At home, I want you to say it out loud. Jump with ed. Jumped. Our word of the day yesterday was presume. Do you remember the picture of the puppy? To presume something means right now. Yesterday, I presumed it was going to be sunny all day and it rained. If I add ed, it becomes presumed. I have dance. Add ed. Danced. 5 years ago, I danced on top of a car. I don't know. That's just silly. Decide. Without the ed at the end, it means right now. I have to decide what I'm going to do with the rest of my day. If I add ed to the word decide, it shows that it already happened. Yesterday, I decided to go for a long walk. My next word is walk. Right now, I can walk. Yesterday, I walked. Yesterday, I walked 5 miles. It's good for my heart. Rush. Sometimes I rush in the mornings because I'm in a hurry. If I add ed to the base word rush, what does that sound like? Rushed. Now I have this word, hop. Like a bunny will hop. If I add ed, what does that sound like? Hopped. Exactly. Here's the trick, though. There are a few rules that we have to follow when we're adding ed to base words. We already know how they're supposed to sound, but today we're going to study a few rules for adding ed to these base words. The word jump, walk, and rush. There's something special about these words, and I'm going to give you a hint. It's about where the vowel is placed. A-E-I-O-U. We have a U before two consonants. Whoops, sorry about that. How do I get back? There we go. If I have two consonants at the end of a word, I'm just going to add ed. J-U-M-P-E-D. Oh, goodness. Sorry about that. If I have the word walk, there's my vowel A, L-K. Two consonants at the end. That means I'm just going to add ed. Rush. There's my vowel again, the letter U, S-H. Sorry about that. Do you ever get frustrated with computers? Sometimes I do. We're back to our word rush. R-U-S-H. I have two consonants at the end, which means I'm just going to add ed. That's the simple way to just add ed. Over here, these words all end in the same letter. They all end in the letter E. That means we have to drop the last letter E, get rid of it, before we add on ed. And here's that word hop. Hop has a rule. We have to double the last letter, H-O-P. We have to double the P before we add ed. Let's practice. I've made a little game. I wish you were able to play it with me, so we'll play together. We have to match hop to the correct spelling with ed. Hop, H-O-P. I need to double the last consonant before I add ed. Walk. There are two consonants at the end, so that means I just add ed. Walked. Presume, that's our word of the day. There's an E at the end. Drop the E, add ed. Presumed. Decide. There's also an E at the end of the word. Drop the E, add ed. Decided. Jump. There are two consonants at the end. That's an easy. Just add ed. Dance. There's an E at the end. Drop the E, add ed. And our last word, rush. There are two consonants at the end, so we just add ed. Rushed. There we go. Now, let's categorize. We have 3 columns. This is connected to what I would like you to do at home. 3 columns. The first is base word plus ed. That's when we have the 2 consonants and we just add ed. The second column is base word, drop the E, add ed. And finally, we have our base word where we double the final consonant before adding ed. Up at the top here, I have a few words. I just need to put them into the correct categories. This is similar to what you will do at home. Turned, that's just a base word plus ed. Decided, drop the E, add ed. Stopped, that's doubling the last consonant, the final consonant. Arrived, drop the E, add ed. Climbed, just add ed. Dashed, also just add ed. Presumed, drop the E, add ed. Shoved, this one, we drop the E, add ed. And finally, remembered. This one's a little tricky because there's actually 2 endings to it. To finish up, when you practice at home, I'd like you to start by opening a book, a magazine, or any piece of paper with a lot of text or writing on it. Look for words that have an ED ending. Then I want you to think about the pattern in the spelling. Word study is all about patterns. What happened to the base word when ED was added? Was the final E dropped? Was the final consonant doubled? Or did nothing happen to the base word before ED? On a sheet of blank paper, categorize your findings. All of those words that you found, what columns would they belong in? Have fun finding patterns in word study. Up next, we have a story to continue talking about narratives. Thank you.
Hello, learners. So I wanted to talk to you now about how a story is structured. And that sounds like some big words, but when you're reading a story, it's really good to think about the events that happen in the story. And so a really great way to do that is to create kind of what we call a map for the story, or a plot diagram. And so a plot of a story is how the story unfolds, right? How it begins, what happens to the characters, the events that take place, and then eventually how the story resolves or how it ends. So I wanted to show you a couple of ways to do that. And I'd really like, as you're reading perhaps one of your chapter books, to think about that plot structure in the story, and then go to your writing journal and plot it out for me. So let's take a look at how you would do that. I have a couple of ways. So let's first take a look at our story mountain. And our story mountain sort of is exactly what it sounds like. We start out with the background. So what happens to those characters? How are they introduced to you? How does the story begin? Does it catch you? Does it have a hook? So that background is really important because it includes what we call the setting, where the story takes place, who the characters are. You might learn their names. And remember, a setting is as often like the time that it happens, which means not necessarily the time of day, not 2 o'clock, but the time means sort of the year that it happens. Did it happen in the past? Is it happening in the future? Or is it something that's happening right now? So that's the time, and then the place. Does it happen in space? Or does it happen down on Earth? Maybe your story is written in New Mexico. So that's what we call the background. Background is our introduction. After that, we start talking about action. What is going to happen to our characters? And this is the exciting part of the story. And you can see the mountain has some little crevices in it, doesn't it? It's not straight up because things happen to our character. And events, so we call those, another word for that is events. What kind of events lead up to what we call the climax? What is that thing that happens to our character that they can't go back from? It's that point of highest tension in the story. That's the climax, that's the high point. After that, we go down the mountain. So we've worked hard to climb up to it. We've reached the top of the mountain, and now we have what we call falling action. Those are the events that the character is solving his problem, or her problem, or its problem. So that's the falling action. And then finally, we have a resolution. That's a big word, isn't it? We have another word for that, ending, right? How does our story end? So when you're reading your chapter books, I'd love you to plot out the plot, but an easier way to do that is to actually use one of our picture books. So I'm going to use our book that we read yesterday. And if you weren't able to listen to the story, it is on YouTube, so you can go in there and take a listen. It's a great story about a little boy who's trying to be a writer. Actually, he's been given an assignment to be a writer. And he has a writing block, which happens to everybody. So he just needs to unleash his brain to think about events. But picture books are a really easy way to study the plot or the story mountain, because they're shorter, of course, right? Less words, so it's easier to kind of see what happens. So let's plot out the structure of Ralph Tells a Story. If you remember, the first thing that happened to poor Ralph was he was in his classroom and he got an assignment from his teacher to write a story. And I'll tell you what, if you have sticky notes at home, these are an awesome way to sort of make a note to yourself for the plot, and that's kind of how I do it. If you don't have sticky notes, it's not a problem. You could cut up some paper, or you could just write it down in your writing journal. So my first event in my story is that Ralph must write a story. He's been given an assignment from the teacher to write a story. So that is going to go as my first event. So here's our story mountain. I just kind of wrote it out, and this is what I'd like you to do in your writing journals so you can take a look at your plot structure. Do notice on the one that I wrote out, I have a really long line here, don't I? The introduction is often going to be the longest part of your story. It takes a long time to learn about characters, to tell your readers about the setting, and kind of give them the introduction, maybe personalities and names, things that are going on. So Ralph, he has to write a story. The second thing that happens to him, poor Ralph, he has no story. He just can't think of anything to write about. He thinks he's kind of boring. So what does Ralph do? Anything he can to not write his story. So he finds other things to do. Ralph gets a drink at the water fountain. He wants to staple papers. He wants to lay under his desk and daydream. Anything that he can do to get out of writing a story. The next thing that happens, poor Ralph, is that everyone seems to have a story except him. And to make it worse, people are writing stories about Ralph. He just can't understand that. So we met another character, and her name was Daisy. Daisy was the student that was able to write tons of stories. She had a whole book of them by the time they got to reading their stories. She had books, in fact, of stories. So what happens? So now we start the rising action. Ralph begins to think through things. He still can't come up with anything. So he goes under his desk and he closes his eyes and he just thinks. And if you have a writing block, that's a really great thing to do. Sometimes we need to just slow down, close our eyes, and think. It's also helpful to maybe go outside and sit and listen, because good writers use their senses. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you smelling? Those things make good stories, believe it or not. So that's what Ralph did. He went under his desk and he just thought about it. So then he had a memory. As he was thinking and closing his eyes and daydreaming, he remembered an inchworm. He met this inchworm, he saw it in the park. So his mind just started thinking about it. And once he did that, he remembered an inchworm story. Something did happen with that inchworm. In fact, he played with it at the park. A baby came along and picked up the inchworm and put it in her diaper, and then he wanted the inchworm back. So something really exciting happened. Now, the teacher calls all the students to the rug and says, "It's time to share your stories." So that is kind of our climax. Ralph's heart starts thumping. He doesn't know, he's scared to death because she says, "Ralph, you're going first." So now she called on Ralph to go first, and that begins our falling action. Because the point of highest return is Ralph is on the rug and he's scared to death about writing his story, and he's clutching his paper to his chest of the picture that he had drawn. And then he takes a deep breath and he says, "My story's about an inchworm." And guess what? His heart was thumping, but once he started talking, the whole class cheered for him and told him he had an awesome story. So Ralph was feeling really confident. And now at the end of the book, Ralph tells you that he writes a lot. So once he got over that and he got to that point where he had to tell his story, he did some actions and then he was able to write. So that's our picture book of Ralph Tells a Story. And that's a really good way to plot out your diagram. I want to read another book to you today. And it's called Meanwhile. And this one has a lot of action. So let's take a look at that. And we're going to think about, as I read it, I want you to think about the introduction. I want you to think about the rising action. And then what is the point of no return? The point where the character can't return to his old life. He's forever changed. So think about that as we read our story. So our book today is called Meanwhile. And our author of our book is Jules Pfeiffer. The publisher of Meanwhile is HarperCollins. And this book is really cool because the author is also the illustrator. Meanwhile, Raymond! Raymond didn't hear. "Raymond, I want you." Now Raymond heard. It was his mother. She was always finding things for him to do. "One more minute, Mom." Maybe she'll forget, thought Raymond. "I want you now, Raymond." It's not fair. With Raymond's mother, it was always right now and never, "No big deal, you can do it next Tuesday, Raymond." Suddenly, Raymond's eye caught a word in the middle of the page. Meanwhile. It was a word comics always used to change the scene. Meanwhile. But inside a box, meanwhile, with those 3 dots after it. And what it meant was that wherever you were in a story, just a plain, ordinary meanwhile was going to take you somewhere else. "Raymond, I'm losing my patience." What if I had my own meanwhile? Raymond wondered. And with a red marker, He scrawled the word on the wall behind his bed, where he hoped his mother wouldn't see it. Uh-oh, do you think Raymond's going to be in trouble for that? Maybe so. Let's read on. Raymond, if I have to come in there and get you, you're going to be very sorry. Raymond's mother didn't get to finish her thought. Why don't you think she finished her thought? What's going to happen next? Ooh. Raymond was suddenly on a pirate ship on the high seas. Unbelievable. He had meanwhile. Look at that. Raymond took an escape, didn't he? He probably sat down and was thinking, and his mind carried him away. Wicked pirates were boarding a Royal Naval vessel. They were dueling the Queen's loyal sailors. Raymond couldn't just stand by and watch as if it were a picture in a comic book. He clenched a sword between his teeth. Then he swung by a rope over the shark-infested sea into the Royal Naval vessel. He dueled the wicked pirates single-handed and also rescued a beautiful maiden. The only reason he didn't capture the pirate captain was his sword broke. So Raymond was forced to walk the plank. The situation was hopeless. Feed Raymond to the sharks. Raymond's over here saying, it's not fair. Raymond knew he had one last chance to save himself. I have a last request. It's the law of the sea that I have to grant you your last request, grumbled the captain, who had a hook and a peg leg and a patch on one eye. And so did the rest of his crew. I want to write a letter to my mother. But none of the pirates had anything to write with. And why should they? None of them could read. Wait, cried the beautiful maiden. I carry a quill, a vial of ink, and my scroll in the cloak. So right there on the plank, Raymond scrolled the word, meanwhile. You guessed it. Did you say that with me? Raymond was out west, chased by a posse. So what happened there, learners? He wrote the word meanwhile, and that changed the scene for him, didn't it? Sometimes we wish we could do that in our real lives, don't we? We could just write a word and boom, we're transported somewhere else. He didn't know why. Maybe he was wearing a mask and they mistook him for an outlaw. Raymond tried to reason with the posse. Hey, I'm a good guy. This isn't even my mask. See? I'll even take it off. Raymond made a sharp left and galloped into a canyon. Right into an avalanche. Lucky for Raymond, he was a great trick rider. He maneuvered his horse to miss the falling rocks. Raymond did not see the ferocious mountain lion. Great, not even a scratch when he fell, but uh-oh. Until it was almost too late, he reached for his gun. He didn't have a gun. How could he be a cowboy out west and not have a gun? The only thing he found in his holster was a rusty bullet. The mountain lion leaped. The situation was hopeless. Raymond knew he had one last chance to save himself. He made a mad dash over to the nearest rock, and with the pointy end of a rusty bullet, he scratched out, did you guess it? He scratched out meanwhile. Oh, where is he going now? He's just transported himself again. Raymond was in outer space, being chased by Martians. He evened the odds against him by shooting down 112 Martian spaceships. The evil two-headed king of the mountain, Martians, got in a lucky shot. Raymond left his aft, zap, and then his fore. The leftover Martians zoomed in on him. The situation was hopeless. Raymond knew he had one last chance to save himself. He switched on his backpack, autopower, vapor writer, and he wrote, "Meanwhile." Raymond was walking the plank again. But wait, what happened? Over he went into the shark-infested sea. The situation was hopeless. It's not fair. Raymond knew he had one last chance to save himself. He dipped his finger into the vial of ink and printed on the side of the ship, "Meanwhile." Raymond was out west again. The mountain lion gulped him down in one bite. Raymond was swallowed alive. He felt around his holster for the rusty bullet. It wasn't there. The situation was hopeless. It's not fair. Raymond knew he had one last chance to save himself. He took off a cowboy boot. With the pointy nail of his big toe, he carved out on the lion's tummy, "Meanwhile." Raymond was ducking missiles again in outer space. But wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that his backpack autopower vapor writer had failed. Meanwhile, but nothing happened. Raymond had used up his meanwhiles. Meanwhile, 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 meanwhile. He was falling 1,000 feet a second, right towards his house. He was going to crash through the roof. His mother would kill him if he made a mess of the house. The situation was hopeless. It's not fair. Raymond knew he had one last chance to save himself. He shouted as loud as he could, "The end." It worked. Raymond was back in his room. "Raymond, if I have to come in there and get you, you're going to be very sorry." Uh-oh. "Oh, there you are, Mom. What can I do to help you?" All right, so I would like you to take a think about that book. There was a lot of action. So we're going to have a lot of rising action, a lot of mountains, aren't we? A lot of crevices to fill in. So think about that book. Try to plot out the plot for either this book or one that you are reading. Thank you.
Hi, friends. Now that we have read our great story, Meanwhile, we've talked about a plot diagram, how stories kind of start simple, get a little bit more exciting, and then they get to the point of no return, the climax of the story, and then they fall to the resolution. When we read stories, we can understand plot so that we can then write stories. Make sure you have your writer's notebook out, because we, today, are going to work on writing a story that follows this plot diagram. In case you weren't here yesterday, I introduced a writer's notebook. I really love adding stickers, pictures, drawings to the cover of your writer's notebook. It just helps you keep it a little bit more safe. Inside our writer's notebook, I start with the heart of writing. The heart of writing is a brainstorming page. If you're ever feeling like, I don't know what to say next, or I don't know what to write next, you can look in your heart of writing for ideas. The heart of writing has characters, settings, events, and then things you love. This is called a brainstorming technique. It helps you get your ideas together. Another brainstorming technique is called Scarman. This one is kind of like a treasure map of accidents that you've had. This is my personal Scarman. I drew the outline of a body, and right here I showed I got 47 stitches right here. I showed a bee sting, I showed another scar, and I showed a symbol of a broken arm. I have had a lot of accidents. I've had a lot of fun too. Hopefully, yesterday, you were able to draw your scar man. If you didn't, you can still do that today. Next, I'm thinking about each of these scars. These all happened at different times in my life, but they are all stories. I have to decide which story do I want to tell first. And I think I want to tell this story, the story of when I broke my arm. This happened when I was in 7th grade during spring break. What I'm doing right now is I'm giving you some background. I want to get my ideas organized. This may not look like writing to you, but this is an important part of the writing process. I'm getting my ideas organized. So what I did was on a new page, I drew 6 boxes. I left a little bit of space between them. It almost looks like a comic strip. Then I numbered them. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Number 4 looks a little different because number 4 is the climax of my story. This is the point of no return. Once this happened, I couldn't undo it. This is the moment that I got hurt. This is where I'm going to draw the exact moment. I'm going to draw what happened in box 4 before I draw any of the other boxes. Because usually, when someone sees a scar or hears that you got hurt, you tell them the most important part. You tell them the climax. But when we're writing, we have to learn how to develop all of that. So let's get the good stuff out first. I'm going to start in scene number 4. How did you break your arm, Miss Abby? Well, I fell off a cliff, kind of. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use story elements. I'm going to draw my setting. My setting was kind of like a story mountain. I was out in the desert, and I was on a 3-wheeled ATV. This is not an art project, but this is me going off of the hill on my 3-wheeled ATV. I tumbled down, and here's me, sad, crying, oh my goodness, and my arm was under the 3-wheeled ATV. Some of you might go on adventure trips with your family members or friends where you ride vehicles that take gasoline. This was one of them, and it was not the safest thing. So as you see, the most important part of this story happens right here. I fell off the ATV, which fell off the cliff hill, and it crushed my wrist. That's it. That's my story. Now, writers, we need to expand. We need to expand. So now I'm going to go back a few steps. I'm going to show you how to really open this up. So, how did this all begin? Well, it happened when I was 12 years old. So it happened in 1993. That sounds like 100 years ago. It was 1993 during spring break. I'm just writing as many details as I can. The time is the setting. That's really important. 1993, spring break, my family took a trip. I'll drive a big old RV. That's supposed to be an RV. My students always make fun of my drawings. That's supposed to be an RV. It looks like a shoe. Okay, we drove a big old RV out to the desert. There were some palm trees out there, lots of hills, and we were supposed to camp for the whole week. What happens when you draw is your memory starts remembering other details, other story elements that are important. So everything was good. There is no accident here. This is just a trip that my family's taking. Spring break, 1993. We have our RV, and then if you can think of who are the characters involved. You may go on trips with friends. I go on trips, well, at this time with my family. So there's me, Jesse, Jacob, Mom, and Dad. They were in my Heart of Writing yesterday. So it was the 5 of us going on a spring break trip. Okay? Now, we got there, we got situated, and I have to start building up to what the problem is. I'm going to add in the next day. The next day, my older brother, Jesse, says, let's go for a ride. Of course, being the little sister, I said, sure. So excited. Sure, I can put little speech bubbles in here. We had to get on our ATVs, the little 3-wheelers. This is my picture of an ATV. I'm sorry if it doesn't make sense. So he had his, I had mine. I'm 12 years old. I'm thinking I'm very grown up and I'm able to ride this. The sun was shining. It was exciting. I want to draw those hills in the background. It's okay if I go outside of the lines. I'm going to write Jesse's name because he's one of the characters in my story. I think my mom and dad and younger brother, they were probably having breakfast, just getting up for the day. So now I need to get closer to my climax. I'm building my story. So this is where Jesse and I are on the hill. That's supposed to be Jesse's ATV, and he's fine. He's confident. He's riding. Then he takes a sharp left turn. I'm going to use that term, sharp left. Because what happened was, I wasn't ready for that sharp left. I was following behind, and to be honest, I started feeling a little nervous. If you've ever done anything scary, you start to build this anxious feeling inside, feeling like this might end badly or it might be fun. That's what I was feeling inside. So this is me in the back. I want to keep labeling me. And I was starting to get nervous. Friends, I presumed I would be fine. Using our word from yesterday, I thought, let me just follow my brother. Let me follow him. Suddenly, This word is what's going to link these two boxes together. I go from riding the hill, nervous, sharp left, to now Jesse is up here. I'll draw his. And he probably had his mouth open like, oh no, as I fell down the hill. I can't end my story there. When you learn about story elements, as soon as the climax happens, we have to have a falling action. What happened next? Take a moment and think about your Scarman. Which story do you want to tell? Once you've decided what your story is, you have to determine what was the point that you got hurt. That's called the climax, the point of no return. After you got hurt, what happened next? Who helped you? Where did you go? What happened next? I'll be honest, this is the point where my students ask, Ms. Carlson, can I add more boxes? And I tell them, of course you can. I'm going to try to concise my falling action into one box. After I was hurt, this is hard. My brother came. He picked me up and put me on his bike. So we rode on his ATV, both of us. So there was Jesse, and then there was me. I was crying the whole way. I had tears pouring like a waterfall. Tears. And to be honest, my brother was really sad as well. He was very worried. He knew he was going to get in trouble. He was scared for me as well. We went back to the RV where we found my parents. We had to go then to the emergency room. So I'm even going to draw ER because that's where I got my cast. Lastly, my resolution is how am I today? Friends, this has been a long time. This has been over 20 years. I don't think yours is 20 years apart. But how much time has passed? 20 years later? And friends, I don't even have a scar. It's a scar story without a scar. I have no scar. I have no pain, but I have wisdom. I am wiser about some of the activities that I do now. Tomorrow, we're going to turn this into writing. This is just helping us organize our story. Tonight, I hope you might have a few comics at home. This is similar to a comic structure, comic book. Diary of a Wimpy Kid also has some comic elements to it. And this story, it's called Designing Dandelions. It is also a comic book. Comic books are narratives as well. They have characters, settings, rising actions, climax, great vocabulary. That's what we will continue talking about all this week. Thank you so much, 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, for being at home with APS. Have a great day.